I first saw him at a dinner party on a quiet evening in New York. The lights were soft, and the room was filled with laughter that did not feel real. I was standing beside my aunt, smiling at people I barely knew, when I noticed him across the table. His name was Newland Archer. Everyone said he was the kind of man a woman should marry. He was kind, intelligent, and full of good manners. But even from that distance, I felt there was something restless in his eyes. At that time, I was engaged to be married. My life already had a clear path, drawn by my family, my name, and the rules of the city. People said I was lucky. I had a beautiful home waiting for me, a kind husband, and a place in the highest part of society. But even then, a small voice inside me whispered that I was walking into a cage built from expectations. That evening, he came to speak to me. His words were polite, but his eyes told another story. He looked at me as if he wanted to understand who I was beyond the perfect dress and smile. I felt something I had never felt before, a quiet pull that frightened and excited me at the same time. Before we continue, I would love to know, where are you listening from? Which city, which country? Share it in the comments, and if you are enjoying this story, please subscribe for more emotional stories every week. Later, I heard people whisper about his engagement to a young woman named May. She was sweet, kind, and perfect for him. Everyone said they would be happy together. I tried to smile when I heard their names together, but something in me ached. I told myself that it was foolish to care. I told myself that I only admired his honesty and warmth. But deep inside, I knew I was lying. When I met May for the first time, she held my hands and smiled. She spoke with the softness of a girl who had never questioned her world. I felt a strange sadness as I looked at her. She reminded me of who I had once been: pure, obedient, and safe inside the walls others had built for her. She loved him, and I could see that he wanted to love her too. But there was distance in his eyes, a small flicker of doubt that no one else seemed to see. In New York, appearances were everything. A person could be dying inside, but as long as they smiled, the world believed they were happy. I lived that way too. Every morning I wore my fine clothes, greeted the same people, and smiled at the same words. I was trained to be graceful, quiet, and beautiful. Nobody asked what I wanted. They only told me who I should be. When I saw him again, it was at the opera. The lights shone on the golden curtains, and the music rose like a wave. I could feel his presence even before I turned my head. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I felt my heart stop. It was a simple look, but it said everything that words could not. I wanted to look away, but I could not. After that night, he started to appear everywhere, at dinners, at small gatherings, even on the quiet streets of the city. Each time, "Let's joy," he spoke to me with careful respect, but his voice carried a warmth that was dangerous. We never said anything wrong, but the silence between our words became heavy. I began to wait for those moments without admitting it to myself. One afternoon, he came to visit my aunt. I was there too, pretending to read. When he entered the room, the air felt different. He spoke about books, travels, and dreams. His thoughts were full of life beyond the walls of our small world. I listened and felt alive again. I realized how long it had been since I had truly spoken to anyone. For the first time in years, I felt seen. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about his words, about his quiet strength and his sadness. I knew he loved May, but I also knew that he was fighting something inside him. I wondered if he saw the same emptiness in me. I began to question everything I believed in. What was happiness if it only existed in other people's eyes? What was love if it had to hide behind good manners and silence? Days turned into weeks. The city prepared for his wedding, and every newspaper, every friend spoke about it. People loved to talk about how perfect their lives would be. I tried to smile when I saw them together, but my heart felt heavy. He looked at her with kindness, but not with passion. He looked at me with something that burned quietly, like a candle in the dark. When I was alone, I often thought about running away. I dreamed of a small house by the sea, far from the noise and the rules. I imagined him there, free from the world that held us both. But dreams were dangerous things for women like me. In our world, freedom was not a gift, it was a scandal. Then one evening, something changed. He came to say goodbye before leaving for a short trip. He looked tired and quiet, but when our eyes met, I saw everything that had been hidden behind his calm face. He did not need to say a word. I understood him completely. We were both trapped in lives that others called perfect. After he left, I sat by the window and watched the city lights. I thought about all the people smiling behind their walls, living safe and silent lives. I wondered how many hearts in this city were quietly breaking behind closed doors. I realized then that my story was not special. It was simply one of many lives that looked beautiful but felt empty. The next morning, I put on my finest dress and smiled again. I walked into the world as if nothing had changed. But inside I knew everything had. I had seen love, and I had seen what it cost. Before I continue with this story, please like, maybe subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. When Newland returned to New York, everything seemed the same, but it no longer felt the same to me. The same people, the same dinners, and the same smiles surrounded us. Yet I felt that every word carried a different meaning now. When he looked at me, I felt a quiet understanding between us. We were both trying to pretend that our hearts were calm, but the truth lived in our eyes. He had married May soon after his return. The newspapers wrote about the wedding as if it was a royal event. People said that they were a perfect couple. They said that he was lucky to have her and that she was lucky to have him. I smiled when I heard these words, but inside me, something closed, like a door that would never open again. At the first dinner after their wedding, I watched them from across the room. May looked peaceful and proud. She believed in her marriage with all her heart. She was raised to think that love was simple and that marriage was its happy end. I was raised the same way, but now I knew how false that dream could be. When our eyes met, Newland gave a small, polite smile, and then he looked away. I understood what it meant. It was not coldness, it was pain. I tried to keep my life quiet and proper. I went to social events, spoke with people, and filled my days with work and visits. But my thoughts were never still. Every sound, every face, reminded me of him. Sometimes I caught myself waiting to hear his voice in the crowd, even though I knew he would not come. I hated myself for that, yet I could not stop. A few months later, I went to a concert where he was also present. I had not expected to see him there, and when I did, my heart began to race. He looked the same, but his eyes seemed more tired. When he saw me, there was a quiet moment when time seemed to stop. We were surrounded by hundreds of people, yet it felt like we were the only two in the world. After the concert, he walked beside me for a short while. We talked about music, about travels, about things that did not matter. But under those words, something else was alive, something that had no place in our world. When I went home that night, I sat in the dark and thought about his voice. It had warmth and sadness at the same time. It was the voice of someone who wanted to be free, but did not know how. Weeks passed. He and May began to visit my family more often. It was always polite, always innocent. Yet I could see the tension in his face when we spoke. He tried to hide it from everyone. Also to honest for a woman, but I could feel it. I had become his secret escape, the small space where he could breathe. But I knew it could not last. Every meeting, every quiet smile, made the world around us more dangerous. Sometimes I asked myself if I was wrong to feel this way. May was kind to me. She always treated me with care and respect. I felt guilty when I saw her happiness, but I also felt that her happiness lived in another world, a world of illusions. She did not see the emptiness, thus, behind her husband's smile. She believed she had everything. I could not take that away from her, even if I wanted to. One winter evening, my aunt invited them both for dinner. The city was cold and silent under a soft white snow. I helped to prepare the table, but my hands were shaking. I knew that he would be there, and I told myself that I would act as if nothing mattered. When they arrived, he greeted me politely, his voice calm and steady. But when our eyes met, the truth passed between us again, as strong as ever. Dinner was long and filled with laughter. May spoke about their home and her plans for the summer. I listened quietly, my heart far away. When the evening ended, Newland stayed behind for a few minutes while May spoke with my aunt. He looked at me for a moment, and I could see all the words he wanted to say, but could not. Then he said only, "Good night." It was such a simple phrase, yet it carried more meaning than any confession. That night, I lay awake thinking of him. I imagined what his life was like in that beautiful house, surrounded by perfect silence. I wondered if he ever looked out of his window and thought of me. I imagined him sitting beside his wife, smiling when he had to, pretending to be happy. I felt both sadness and love. I knew that he could not leave her, and I respected that. But I also knew that part of him belonged to me, even if we could never speak of it. Spring came, bringing sunlight and flowers that looked too bright for the way I felt inside. I began to go out more often, to escape my thoughts. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw him again. It was not planned. He was alone, sitting on a bench, looking at the lake. I wanted to turn and walk away, but he saw me and stood up. He said my name softly, and I felt that the world had disappeared around us. We walked together for a short time, speaking about small things. But then he looked at me and said quietly that he sometimes wished his life had been different. My heart began to beat faster, and I wanted to ask what he meant, but I stayed silent. He did not need to say more. His eyes said it for him. After that day, I avoided him as much as I could. I knew that every time we met, the distance between what we felt and what we could do grew harder to bear. I began to think that love was not meant to bring peace. It was meant to show us who we really were and what we were not strong enough to change. Months passed again. Their life went on, and people kept calling them the perfect couple. I learned to live with my quiet sadness. It became part of me, like a scar that never fades. I told myself that some love stories are not meant to end with happiness. Some exist only to remind us that freedom has a price. One evening, I saw him one last time before he and May were to travel abroad. He told me that he hoped I would find peace. I smiled and said I already had. It was a lie, but a kind one. As he left, I felt the air grow cold around me. I realized that sometimes love must be buried in silence, not because it is wrong, but because it is too deep for the world to understand. When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a long time. I thought about everything we had never said. It was strange, but I felt calm. Our story had never begun, yet it would never end. Years passed, and the city around me changed. New faces appeared in the same old places. The buildings grew taller, and the noise of life became louder. But inside me, time moved slowly, like a quiet river that never reached the sea. I had learned to smile again, but the smile no longer belonged to my heart. It belonged to the world. I often heard about Newland and May from others. They had built a respected life, one full of comfort and calm. They went to parties, traveled to Europe, and were invited everywhere. People said they were the example of a perfect marriage. Sometimes I thought about what that word meant. Perfection was not always joy. Sometimes it was only silence that everyone admired because it looked safe. I still lived in New York, close to the same circles that had once made me feel alive. My name was still spoken, but with less excitement now. I had become another quiet figure in a world that liked new things. I accepted it. I had stopped searching for meaning in the faces around me. What I had once wanted was gone, but I carried it inside me like a small light. There were moments when I tried to forget him completely. I traveled to the countryside, stayed near the ocean, and filled my days with work and letters. Yet every time I saw the sunset, I thought of him. There was something about the colors of evening that brought him back to me. I did not fight it anymore. Some people spend their lives chasing love. Others spend their lives remembering it. Years later, I heard that May had become ill. The news reached me quietly through a friend. It made me stop everything I was doing. For a long time, I stared at the letter, feeling both sadness and something else I could not name. She had been kind to me when she did not have to be. She had loved him in her own way, simple and true. She did not know how much she had protected him from the world's judgment. After her death, Newland stopped appearing in public as often. I imagined him walking alone through the same streets where we once met, older now, carrying the weight of all that was left unsaid. I often wondered if he ever thought of me, or if his memories had softened with time. People said he became quiet, serious, and distant. Perhaps he had found peace in his silence, as I had tried to do in mine. One spring afternoon, I received a letter from his son. He wrote that his father would be coming to Paris, and that he hoped to visit me. The words made my heart tremble in a way I had not felt for many years. I read the letter again and again, trying to understand how I felt. I was no longer the same woman. My face had changed, my heart had become calm, but his name still had power over me. When the day came, I prepared my small apartment carefully. I wanted everything to look simple but warm. I placed flowers on the table and opened the window to let in the air. I waited quietly, but as the hours passed, no one knocked. The sun began to fall and the light grew soft. Then I heard voices in the street below. I looked down from the window and saw him standing there. He had not changed as much as I expected. His hair was gray now, and his shoulders were heavier, but his face still had the same calm strength. He stood outside the building, looking up at my window, but he did not move. His son was speaking to him, smiling, pointing toward the stairs, but Newland only shook his head slowly. I understood then what he was thinking. We had lived with silence for so many years that it had become our language. To see each other again would have broken that peace. We both knew that our love had lived not in action, but in memory. It was pure because it had never been tested by real life. It was strong because it had never been touched by time. I stayed at the window and watched as he turned away. He walked down the street, slow and calm, until the crowd swallowed him. I kept looking even after he was gone. There was no pain, no tears, only a quiet acceptance. He had given me something that no one else could ever give me. It was not happiness, but understanding. It was not comfort, but truth. That night, I sat by the window for a long time. The air of Paris was soft and full of sounds from the street below. I thought about the girl I had once been, full of dreams and fears. I thought about the woman I had become, living between duty and desire. And I thought about him, the man who had changed my heart without ever holding it in his hands. Some people think that love must end in togetherness to be real. But I learned that sometimes love is most honest when it cannot be lived. It remains untouched by time, safe in memory. I carried that thought with me into every quiet morning, into every empty evening. In the end, I did not marry. People asked why, and I always smiled and said that life had given me all I needed. What I meant was that I had already lived my greatest love, even if the world never saw it. It had shaped me, softened me, and taught me how to live with peace inside a lonely heart. Years later, when I grew old, I often walked through the same streets where we had once met. Sometimes I thought I saw him again in the crowd, though I knew it was only my mind remembering. I would smile quietly and continue walking. Life, I had learned, does not always give us what we dream of, but it gives us what we are strong enough to carry, and so I carried him, not in my arms, but in my memory. He remained there, calm and distant, forever standing in the sunlight of that quiet street in New York. I never called out to him. I never needed to. Some love stories are not meant to end with a kiss or a promise. They end in silence, and in that silence, they live forever. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.